about 10 years now.
Oh, wow.
They rent this building for $100 a year from Pine Grove Funace State Park. This would have been the old mill house, and is now an Appalachian Trail Museum on the trail itself. The dream of the Appalachian Trail was presented in 1921 by Benton MacKay. He wrote an article talking about an oasis in the woods. He actually dreamed more of what the White Mountains are today, with all of the huts along the way and different small communities. What he imagined is that you would leave the hustle and bustle of towns and enter into a section of trail where you would stay for the weekend and maybe visit the entire trail throughout your lifetime. When he presented this letter, it really took hold. A lot of people liked the idea of getting into an oasis in the woods, a footpath through the Appalachian Mountains. And the Appalachian Trail Conference was formed in 1925 to oversee the actual building of the trail. Not a lot was actually done during this time, unfortunately, of physical work on the trail, until Myron Avery was elected the Appalachian Trail Conference chair in 1931. He worked directly with the government, securing funds from the Civilian Conservation Corps for the actual building of the trail. Ironically, they would go into the towns and they would basically give government paychecks for people to come and work on the trail, and because of this, the local town folk for several years called the Appalachian Trail the Government Trail. As you know, today it's known as the People's Trail. Over here behind you is a measuring wheel that Myron Avery would have used.
So cool.
Myron Avery did hike every mile of the trail in the 1930s, not continuously, but that was his actual measuring tool for the trail. Neither Benton MacKay nor Myron Avery ever imagined that the trail should or could be through hiked from one end to the other. Myron Avery was more focused on a continuous footpath from Maine to Georgia, but not intention on someone through hiking. And Benton MacKay was thinking more of communities along the way. It was Earl Schaefer who reported the first ever completed through hike of the Appalachian Trail. He hiked it 3 times, 1948, 1968, and 1998.
Wow.
Earl Schaefer hiked it to walk off the war. He was a World War II veteran. This is some of the gear that he would have used, the heavier military-style gear. He didn't carry the typewriter, but he was a well-known writer and artist. This shelter was built by Earl Schaefer. It would have been one of 6 shelters that was built by him, and at the time that it was collected from the trail, it was the last remaining shelter, built by Earl Schaefer. Now, when he built it, he didn't put a floor in the bottom of the shelter, and he was very adamant that shelters should not have floors because of mice and rats and disease and trash and so forth. But the Trail Club actually did put a floor in the shelter. Once they did that, he wrote a letter basically saying, remove the floor or my name, and the Trail Club did remove the name of the shelter and changed it to the Peters Mountain Shelter. So Earl Schaefer's name was removed from the shelter, but in the late 80s it was collected and stored historically. It's here now without the floor again, and it's known once again as the Earl Schaefer Shelter.
Very cool.
Gene Espy is credited as being the second person to complete a northbound through hike of the Appalachian Trail. This is some of the gear that he would have carried. His lamp was a carbide lamp. There was carbide in the bottom and water in the top, and they would mix together. It would produce a flammable gas that would burn very brightly. That's what he actually used for his headlamp. He carried 2 pairs of socks, one that he washed every day, the other he'd hang from his backpack. One pair is at Amicaloa Falls, where most of you started the trail, and the other pair is here. He carried about 45 pounds of gear. Grandma Gatewood was considered to be the pioneer of lightweight backpacking. Unlike Earl Schaefer and Gene Espy, she carried a pack that was about 20 pounds, and it would be thrown over one of her shoulders. This is some of her gear. Now, even being a lightweight backpacker, she would have carried one of these books. There was about 7 at the time. These were the guidebooks. They would have generally told you about the sections of trail that they were over. They were not written by the same people, and they were never intended to be a guide to get you to hike through the entire trail. It wasn't until Ed Garvey hiked the trail and took meticulous notes of where every single water source, shelter, water sources of the shelter, road crossings, and so forth. His book, his data book, is still alive today. It is the Appalachian Long Distance Hikers Association data book. They have volunteers who go out on the trail every single year and verify each mile and marker to make sure that it's the most accurate book on trail. That goes straight back to Ed Garvey. The National Park Service at one time, due to low funding, was going to shut down every single shelter in the Shenandoah National Park. Ed Garvey stood up to the National Park Service, and they did back down. So if any of you stayed in the shelter in the Shenandoahs, it was because of Ed Garvey standing up to the NPS on that one. He was also a well-known rider, and it was because of him the popularity of the trail increased. In the 1930s, there was only about 5 people who had hiked every single piece of the trail. In the 1940s, there would have been 3. The 1950s, 14. It doubled to 37 in the 1960s, tripled or more than tenfolded in 1970s. It was sometime between the 1980s and the 1990s that it really took hold. Right now, we're seeing about 1,100 to 1,200 finishers every single year. So this will be double 20,000 very quickly. Most of the hikers on the trail knew the name of Baltimore Jack until about 2016. At one time, he had more through hikes and section hikes than any living person. He lived on the trail for the last 25 years of his life. He was a well-known writer. He was a film critic for the Boston Globe, and he was a very outspoken opinionist and a raging drunk. Unfortunately, it was alcohol that got him in the end. He was at a hostel in Franklin, North Carolina. He went to the hospital and later died. The hostel that he's in is now known as the Baltimore Jack Hostel. So you guys are in the center of the center of the center of the Appalachian Trail. The first center of the trail is the historical center, or the psychological center, and that's in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Harpers Ferry, the ATC, originally was in Washington, D.C., and they moved to Harpers Ferry specifically to be the center point of the trail. So that's why today it's known as the psychological center point of the trail. The next sign you would come to would have been the actual center point for the mile marker this year. Angry Bird, the manager of this museum, is the one that puts that where it belongs each year. The third one you come across is the historical wooden sign. This was made by a hiker known as Woodchuck. His real name was Chuck Wood. Yeah. And then you'll come to the final one just south of Boiling Springs. When you get to this one, it is a stone with a plaque on the inside. This is the original plaque that was in the stone until it was stolen. It was later replaced with a replica plaque. And a farmer one day, while plowing his field, discovered this plaque, put it on his mantle, until the Maryland Appalachian Trail Club heard of it, went and asked for the plaque back, and he of course gave it to them, and then they entrusted it to the care of the museum itself. So this is the historical once stolen center point knob.
It's just like, I found it, I swear.
That's awesome for stealing that. Good for him.
The sign that you're used to seeing today would not have been the historic Katahdin sign. This sign is actually built by Lester Kenway. Lester Kenway is credited to be doing most of the trail work in the north. If there's any trail that you've walked on the north, more than likely he has put his blood, sweat, and tears into that. He's a member of the Pacific Appalachian Trail Club, the Appalachian Long Distance Hikers Association, of course the ATC itself. The last time I saw him was at the biennial last year. This is a living legend, and he is the one that hand makes each of the signs. The Katahdin signs are replaced about once every 10 years. That's basically the end of the trip. Walking with Spring, one of Earl Shaper's famous books. When he first produced this book, he would print them out at the house and hand bind them with duct tape and then sell them individually. This is his gear from his. Many of you would think that this would be from his 48 hike. This was actually from his 98 hike.
Oh, wow.
He died a year later. He lived in a chicken coop, and from what I heard from Honey and Bear and Andover, Maine, who are personal friends with him, it was actually the water at the chicken coop that killed him. So I encourage all of you guys to become ATC members, ALDA members, and AT Museum members. You can find all of that at atmuseum.org. And good luck on the rest of your journey. And there's more downstairs and a historical library coming upstairs where they're trying to collect every book.
Become a member.